based on my experience, not just working with Dynamics, but generally with CRM systems, there's a few lessons I wanted to learn with you today. So, a little bit about myself. I work for Avangard as a change manager, so essentially in the user adoption space. And you might be able to tell from my accent that I'm not English, but I have been living in the UK for the last decade, so it does feel like home. Originally, I'm from Greece and Italy, so that puts me in a very good position to love talking and to also be very passionate about it too. Now, that aside, I also love speaking to the point where session I thought, maybe we should give you a badge. Maybe that will make you stop. But it did not work. Kidding aside, my experience as well as my passion is in business application and specifically CRM operations. I've been working with it for probably the last, I want to say decade, but I did do a master's in the beginning. So let's take a year off. So I've worked across the Salesforce Cloud, Adobe Cloud, and in the last few years with Microsoft as well. And I've really enjoyed looking at CRM systems, how they bring really good implementations together to really drive user adoption. And I am a big human evangelist in the tech community. You might wonder, what's a human evangelist? We only know what a tech evangelist is. Well, I'll tell you what it is. It's when someone goes out there and speaks about the human impact of technology rather than just all the fantastic applications of the Microsoft, let's say, ecosystem. And outside of that, I'm a data geek, hence the economics background, and I also love martial arts and singing as well. Um, I put a quote there just as a reminder that we all have a story, we all have something to add to the community, and it's so exciting to be part of it. Feel free to connect on LinkedIn and Twitter. Feel free to tweet throughout as well. But let's put this tale of three cities aside and start with today and what we're going to be talking about. So let's go, I don't know how many of you like the Avengers. Do you want to raise your hands? Have you heard about the Avengers? Do you like the Avengers? Raise hands. Right? Okay, cool. So we have a few fans here. So let's take you back to the Infinity War. And let's think about what that would mean. We're fighting for user adoption. If we're looking at implementation from a war perspective where everyone is trying to chase biggest adoption. Pretty messy. And there's so much to learn to the point where we are going to portal in a few moments the 5 moments of truth that I will share with you about what it looks like when we're working together collaboratively or not to make this a reality. We're going to learn a few lessons, and we're going to be very honest with ourselves about how we could do better and setting up ourselves for success. So bringing a DevOps team, a traditional DevOps team together alongside with people champions such as change managers to bring a successful implementation to the point that it's really championing the customer. And through that, we are going to avenge the traditional retrospective and lessons learned perspective to something that is going to make a difference. We are also going to become today, yes, you heard it, we're going to become guardians of the user galaxy. We are going to find a way to make all those lessons into something we can take into long-term success in a way that is, again, making that real-time impact. And we're going to ask some questions in the end as well about how we can be practical about it. So let me ask you a question. In your projects, implementations that you've been a part of, what are you doing it for? What master do you serve? Who are you building and automating for day to day? Might be obvious, right? Who is the business stakeholder giving us requirements? It's the sponsors. That's the usual answer. But in reality, we are having a sole purpose of making a difference in the end user. But we don't always know who they are. We don't always know what they need. Which means that when you're developing a solution such as a Dynamics 365 instance, it's a bit of a mystical art. It means that if we don't really understand who we're building for, it becomes a bit of a mystical art to get it adopted. I want us to start with a quote from Satya Nadella about generally building products. So he was very clear that the way Microsoft is building products and the way he sees the future is about making very conscious, precise choices when we're building a solution. It doesn't just happen out of thin air. We have to be very clear, starts from requirements, but ultimately we have to be very clear about who we're building, why, and what happens if we don't get it right. Because ultimately, no matter what the solution is, whether it's a Dynamics 365 instances, any other business application, you have to remember your user is king and queen. Imagine a whole, we have a DevOps team. They have a vision. They are ready to bring an agile mindset and make magic happen. But they're not on their own on their journey. We have to think of our business technologists. You might know them as citizen developers. They are pretty key in this journey because ultimately they bring the business mindset. They understand the customer. Sometimes they are the customer and they know what they need, but they need the tools. They need the SMEs, that is our DevOps team, come together with them, make this a reality. And they're not on their own either. It's very important that when we are looking at solutions, we're thinking of a behavior-driven design. You might have heard it as a user-centered design. So you might wonder why I'm using this term instead. And I'll tell you why. User-centered design as a principle is around making sure that you're building for a customer. But if we took it a step further, it's important to build the best practices. So adoption and change management does not become an extra nice to have step for the client, but it actually becomes organic because we are building those behaviors. We're building a system that will naturally, in a way, force the customer and the end user to follow the right best practices and not build bad habits. As an example, allow data, make it sure that we're going to go into production and be happy and be very successful, but it doesn't always go to plan, right? We planned with the best intention, but it was a bit of carnage. So this is where the infinity work comes in, and what I like to call the terrible force. Let me take you back to the beginning of our design journey. This is where we are refining our solution with our architects, and we are building that grand design. Well, at this point, we're all about ideas. We are so excited to build something that we're pretty much trying to impress leadership, whether it's technical leadership, business leadership. We're trying to put our best foot forward. However, the focus is purely on tech and not user stories. You see that pan throughout. Whether you're using DevOps or Jira or whatever tool, you find that most of the stories are technical, how to build a solid technical solution. But if your high-level requirements are not also focused on the user stories that you're trying to fulfill, it becomes quite messy. And at this point, it's quite traditional that change management is not involved into the picture. So adoption at that point has not sunk in as an important element. So this is going to pile up as a problem. But let's see how that happens. Next stage, we are ready to develop. Our developers are going to be our shining stars now. They are ready to get their hands dirty and build something for us. So what happens? Again, if we have not figured out our user stories and we're just delivering a technical solution, we're not going to jump in user experience. Very simple, right? However, we are also embattled, and you're probably going to relate to this. They're pushing us for a very aggressive sprint plan. We have to deliver. The business wants us to deliver 4 months early, which obviously we think is insane, but we still go with it. So if the aggressive plan is there, again, adoption is ignored. And the question is, are we building to meet those or real user needs? That question. So at some point, we are ready to go into our testing environments, and it becomes a bit of a war room. Why is that? Because at this point, it's very obvious that we're going to have to do something about our users. How are we going to get the business ready? How are we going to get the users to adopt? It's a bit of the 11th hour, but anyways, we're going to get our change managers in, ask for help at the last minute. And even though they have the best intentions, it's very clear at this point, the business has no clue. And by business, I mean the wider business, not the one building or commissioning the project. They've no clue what's changing. They've no clue what's going on. They're definitely not ready to help you test and sign it off from a business perspective, which ultimately means that we did not look at user experience. End to end, there's blind spots. And also there's environment issues because the business was not involved in putting the right data forward. Use cases. You might not be surprised to hear that when we deploy, it's even worse. So at this point, the business sees an absolute car crash, loses the faith in the program, and in that deployment stage, there's such terrible adoption. You might wonder what's worse, no adoption or bad adoption? In my opinion, is bad adoption. You'd rather they don't touch the system rather than actually use it in the worst way, put in all the wrong or incomplete data, and in the background, they're still using, let's say, Excel rather than the lovely Power BI dashboard you built them to integrate with Dynamics. They're still sneaking out the back door going to Excel. Nothing wrong with Excel, but obviously you've put all of this fantastic solution forward, and they're still going back to the legacy solutions. And what does that cause you with all these problems? A lot of tech debt. And you don't have any time to fix it either because the program already wants to move to the next phase. Terrible, isn't it? I wonder if there's a part of the multiverse, this infinity war, where we could succeed. If anyone watched the movies, you might have remembered that we have this scene with Doctor Strange. He's envisioning million-plus universes, and there was at least one where they were succeeding. So there must be some chance for us as well. I did promise you I'm going to portal you to the 5 moments of truth of collaboration. So this is what I've learned, and this is what we're going to unpick together. First of all, fusion teams. Spoke about business technologies before. We're going to look at how assembling a fusion team of pro developers and business technologists is going to make for fantastic success. And this success will also come from collaborations in an agile way, in a practical way. So not just thinking about agile as a mindset, but how can you practically and realistically implement it in your team without being too tied down. We're also going to look at how you're promoting the user experience and the user's interest by focusing on user stories that are fulfilling. They are being fulfilled by the tech requirements rather than the other way around. You're not imposing the technology, it's complementing what you need. We're also going to look at how some really good testing practices from the battlefield can really help you as well to set you up for one final moment of success. And this is business resiliency. This is your end game. You want to build an application that is long-term resilient, that is giving your operational teams peace of mind, that is delighting your customers, and ultimately giving you that long-term success and peace of mind. But let's unpick it a little bit more. So it's traditional to sometimes struggle to fusion teams together. There's misconceptions around what a business technologist is. How do we put the right governance in? There's all sorts of misconceptions or maybe concerns that ultimately cause some friction. So how can we put our differences aside? Because generally in life, silos do not work. And this is how we can assemble it. So first of all, one of the benefits of having a fusion team that is having our pro developers and then our makers, our citizen developers coming all together, is that it gives us speed to market. So if you operate in a traditional DevOps environment where you have your pro developers only allowed to build in the environment, you are limited in terms of resources. That means very long estimates, backlog is insane, and you're not able to provide the velocity that your business wants. However, you're also not able to go towards that hyper automation trend, really deploy all the fantastic low code solutions that can get you there. So ultimately, by going into this fusion team mindset, you're also working towards digital democratization. What I mean by that is all those fantastic digital tools that the Microsoft system provides us, we're paving the way, empowering everyone to play a part. And this is where business technologies can really help you unleash. Remember that number from earlier, 4 out of 5 outside of IT. Some more numbers from Gartner. They have some fantastic research. So you can have up to 2.6 times more likely acceleration in your company's digital transformation program. So that's already increasing your success by getting the fusion team together. And even though it does vary per industry, the average is that 41% of employees can be business technologists. Again, the numbers are painting the picture. We can really make a difference. Second, innovation can be anyone's game and job. So by having the fusion team together, you are employing the people that really know what they need. So you're not taking it from someone who has barely used the system and doesn't remember their credentials by they have the budget. No, you're hearing from those that do see the pain points day to day, that do know what they need and can really bring this to life. But what do they lack? They lack the backing of the C-suite. They lack the tools, they lack the role flexibility, and they lack enabling governance. I know it's a scary word, don't be alarmed. It's the difference is that it's enabling them. So how do you do that? Of course, you have your COE, and that's fine, but build it around SMEs that are accessible. So your DevOps team will play a very key role by being accessible and learning together, learning how to collaborate, sharing their knowledge, validating ideas together, because this is breaking down the silos. Moreover, you're going to be able to scale. So not only are you freeing up your backlog by exploiting a new pool of resources, and you're thinking about hyper automation, but because these people are so creative and they want to move away from all these legacy applications, you're hopefully going to move away from a lot of the cost, a lot of the end of life tech, and hopefully out of on-prem if that's not working for you, because ultimately you're going to be able to make more real-time decisions and be more proactive in your business. And this is why the no or low-code solutions are fantastic. We've heard about GPTing everything, and that's fine. Copilot products are a great example of how you can enable your business technologies to really come together very quickly to scale up. So moving on to collaboration and agile. How many times have you heard that your team is going to implement agile, but in practice it's more agile, right? We think about all the principles, but we don't see them in practice. The ceremonies either don't exist or don't make sense and so forth. So how do we make it real? How do we bring collaboration into the mix? So the ceremonies are actually leading towards that and not just pleasing a Scrum Master. So these are the basics, but I'll explain why I'm iterating them today. Prioritization. In a traditional DevOps setup, you're going to go into your prioritization session, you're going to play some poker, and then, you get your story points, you get your t-shirt sizes, it's all good fun. However, by getting the business technologies together, you are able to think outside the box. You can think of quick wins. Why are quick wins important? Not just because they will definitely boost your velocity and your team morale and your burnout chart and all of that, but you're going to create pretty quickly some champions and some allies out of the business. If you can show them how you're trying to help them very quickly rather than waiting in a waterfall way down the line to produce something for them, they're going to be more eager to help you down the line. And also, bigger pain points. Well, story points are important in prioritizing the traditional way. The business technologists can tell you a lot more about what the real bigger pain points are compared to just what DevOps will tell you. To make it even more, let's say, stand out, let me give you a bit of a coin term. We all know, we've talked about user-centered design, and that's important. What if we translate that into the CI/CD? What if we called it adoption-driven? What if the purpose of continuously deploying is to show and to build up that business faith, that integration of a user adoption into our DevOps practice to the point where the reason we're even doing it is because we can show how we can deliver value to the business continuously and not just because our Scrum Master or our business leader wanted so. Next up, stand-ups. Now, we all love a bit of a stand-up, or maybe we don't, depending how long it lasts. And the thing is, when they happen, they usually involve the traditional roles. If you want to work together with change management business technologies, you can't expect that they're not included, but yet somehow out of thin air figure out and get the update. This is why it's important to work cross-functionally, especially if you have multiple Scrum teams, by having a Scrum of Scrums. So that gives you the opportunity to collaborate across the various teams and really bring your business technologies in. Which also means that when you're doing retrospectives, you are really showing that that collaboration, that feedback, those bad journeys, whatever happened, you're bringing it to life. And this is how you also champion continuous feedback. So if you want a retros of retros. So we talked about collaboration, we talked about the fusion teams, but what if we still don't connect the right dots and we still haven't understood our users? What are some tips and tricks about really looking at it from a different perspective? Well, this is where, to begin with, the user stories are very important. So, how frequently do you build technical stories that are linked in some parent-child relationship or whatever kind of relationship with user stories? Kind of have a raise of hands. How often do you build like that? Is it just technical requirements, or is someone else putting in the user stories that are purely not technical and just trying to solve business problems? No hands. One hand. Okay. I like that. See, it's very low. So what happens in practice is that because we're ignoring them, we are probably not collaborating from a wireframe perspective. We're not working maybe with a design studio. We just are depending on the vision of the solution architect, and to the point where when we go into production, or even before that, when our developers, they're kind of second guessing what that vision is. And the reality is that we probably thought we could deliver something that we also said to the client that is not able to manifest. And why it's so important to have not only user stories, but also work with designers in order to create wireframes. This will do two things. They will really champion the user experience by thinking that early on, but also they will help your developers because they can't build blindly. I'm not saying they don't have technical skills. Of course, they know the technology and the systems, but it's not obvious what is possible just by looking at Visio. No, it's not. Because you're not just championing technical requirements, you're building for users. Moving on, you need to think about customers in a non-traditional way as well. So let's say you're building an application, let's say in a retail marketplace, and your end user is traditionally the people purchasing and whatnot. But have you thought about how if you build something that is pretty terrible, you're also going to impact the operational teams in the back end, like customer services? If it's a very glitchy marketplace solution, they're going to keep getting non-value adding calls, and they're going to keep worrying about, let's say, the system not being backed up. And once again, they have all this manual admin. No one's monitoring it, so production support doesn't know what to do. All of this is equally important. So your users might be indirectly them as well. So when you're looking at your definition of done, don't just think about your traditional users, but also all the scenarios where you could have this ripple effects. Because remember, our end game is business resiliency. You don't just need happy customers, you need a happy ecosystem, a smooth and also, and this is one of my biggest pet peeves as well as biggest successes that I found I've implemented is, remember how we talked about prioritization? Change requests as well. So let's be honest, how many times did you receive a little change request over Teams or any messaging? Yeah, there you go, see? So, and I'm sure a lot of you are receiving little favors, which sometimes are much bigger than they think. The reality is you need a change advisory board and a prioritization process that is official, adhere to, and you can hold people accountable to. Not just because someone is trying to pull a favor or someone is senior enough, because there's actual value and there's a business case for it. Hold them accountable to it. Don't let them make you do all the work. Right. So we are now coming to the point where we are ready to go into testing. But let's be honest, sometimes we do release and now what? Is production support's problem? Probably, because we focus so much on the back end and sometimes the front end gets ignored. So how can we do better? This goes back to our initial question. Who are you building for? Who are you testing for? You need a strategy. So when you're building, it's important that you're working with your business technologies to establish a testing strategy that is solid. What does that mean? It's simple, but also very important. You need to have the right scenarios and make sure they're separate between technical and functional for the business. You need to have the right access, so got your root access in place, make sure your environments are stable, and you have the right staging data. Because this is where we as change managers can give you access to a golden resource, which is the change champions. These are business SMEs. They know exactly and functionally what needs to happen, and they are eager to help. But to give you access, you need to help us help you. Give us everything that we need to stage the testing. Moving on, accessibility and usability. So there's four key principles when it comes to the accessibility guidelines that if we're not adhering to, then let's just forget about building altogether. Access thing, which is a luxury. So what are those? So it's operable. Can we use it? It's understandable. Do we even understand? Can we read the screen? Is it robust? Which goes back to resilience. Is it perceivable? So we have fantastic guidelines, and the W3C Foundation can give you the latest 2.1 ones. However, I just wanted to bring an example from the financial services industry that I get involved in a lot that you might also have collaborated with. There's a fantastic piece of legislation called Consumer Duty Act that is going to impact financial services by mid-July. This is a specific legislation that the FCA is putting together in order to show how important it is to focus on things like accessibility, inclusivity, helping customers make the right financial decisions. And if you don't get it right and you get audited, the FCA, so you know what's next. So it just shows that even industries and regulators are putting this at the forefront. And when it comes to devices, don't get me started. I have a background in marketing, so I'm pretty precious about it. But when it comes to testing, we shouldn't just say, well, get me an iPhone, get me an iPad, get me an Android, there we go. Well, that well, we are Dynamics application, you're looking at your business process flow, error messages, make sure that they're at least hard-coded as possible, and the messages actually make sense. Plain English, please, no jargon. Please explain what the problem is, okay? No offense, but if you just leave it to the 11th hour, you're going to see some pretty messy messages which are going to confuse, frustrate, go straight to production support. So make it clear what the problem is, make it clear what's coming next. This will get you out of some disasters, but ultimately, if you're working in a complex ecosystem where you have multiple vendors and you're looking at all these integrations, don't just depend on your vendor to do your testing. Make sure that you're developing backups to the backups. This is where disaster recovery techs come into play, which give you a really good chance of testing that what has been put in the contract can actually happen, because these are all just words until you prove it. And finally, as part of this monitoring process, it's important that, let's say, back to the idea of the retail marketplace, a 24/7 product, but if you don't have a 24/7 resilient service, the 24/7 marketing message makes 0 sense, which means that you're building an ecosystem of monitoring that is real-time, self-servicing, and does the job for you. Don't expect people to be monitoring dashboards in real time. No. As an example, have the Power BI dashboard, that's great, but use Power Automate, set up your real-time trigger alerts, and let them do the job for you. So what we've learned is that ultimately we need to listen to the customer, understand what they need, and let the tech complement it rather than be its own purpose. And ultimately ask questions, challenge the status quo. Just because you're in, the traditional DevOps setting and you have certain roles does not mean you can't challenge them. If something doesn't make sense, challenge your Scrum Master, challenge the developer, whatever the role, even the client. Yes, we can challenge the clients. It is actually possible. So without further ado, I wanted to wish you a great evening. We've come to the end of the session, but thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And if you'd like to connect again, LinkedIn, Twitter here. And also, if you happen to really love Dynamics, there's a great conference next week called Dynamics Minds. It's a bit far, it's in Slovenia, but it's a really great conference if you love Dynamics or Power Platform. Otherwise, keep on rocking, everyone. Thank you so, so much.